Hello there and welcome to Planet America for the election year of 2024. I'm John Barrett.
And I'm Chaz Lachadello, and 2024 is looking a little bit like 2020 right now, John. A Biden-Trump rematch.
Yes, although Nikki Haley is not quite giving up yet and Joe Biden still has a couple of long-shot challengers who probably should quit.
Definitely should quit. Meanwhile, ceasefire protesters are having an impact on the campaign, and so is Taylor Swift.
What?
But first...
The primary campaign to decide the Republican and Democratic presidential nominees appears all but over. Donald Trump's Republican rivals have been dropping out at a rapid rate this year. Frenemy and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie pulled the plug before a single vote was cast in the Iowa caucuses. Trump's 30-point win in the Hawkeye state then saw fourth-placed Vivek Ramaswamy exit the stage and endorse Trump. Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson also ended his campaign without endorsing, and then after a few days' contemplation after his disappointing second-place finish in Iowa, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis headed home to Tallahassee.
Nobody worked harder, and we left it all out on the field.
And that just left former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who came third in Iowa. She took on Trump last week in New Hampshire, where Trump scored an 11-point win, Chaz.
He did, and it's hard to see how Nikki Haley can improve on that result there. Check out the exit polls.
Among Haley voters, 70% are registered undeclared. Only 27% are registered Republican.
It's really hard to win a Republican primary when only 27% of your supporters are Republicans, John.
Yeah, she's doing very well with everybody except Republicans right now. And Trump clearly wants Nikki Haley to just go away.
She's doing like a speech like she won. She didn't win, she lost. You can't let people get away with bullshit, okay? You can't.
Words to live by, but Nikki Haley says she's still in this race to win it, at least until the majority of states have voted on Super Tuesday in early March. And for now, she's taking the gloves off.
Donald Trump was totally unhinged. Unhinged.
In fact, Chaz, Nikki Haley has been openly questioning Donald Trump's mental fitness to be president ever since he made a series of gaffes on the campaign trail.
When you see them hit a certain age, there is a decline. That's a fact. Ask any doctor. There is a decline.
Yeah, that probably cost her the vice presidency. Trump, for his part, says he's fine.
I'll tell you what, I feel sharper now than I did 20 years ago. I really do.
Although he does admit his boast.
I don't know, it's probably not true. It's probably not true.
Once again, definitely not true. Look, Trump, as you said, very much wants this all over. Earlier this week, he tried to threaten Nikki Haley's donors, writing, anybody that makes a contribution to Bird Brain, that's what he calls Nikki Haley, from this moment forth will be permanently barred from the MAGA camp. We don't want them and we will not accept them. Now, it's hard to believe they wouldn't take their money, but Haley responded by putting out a T-shirt, permanently barred. And how did that go?
We sold 10,000 T-shirts. We raised another $1.6 million.
Then the next day, the Republican National Committee considered a draft resolution to, quote, hereby declare President Trump as our presumptive 2024 nominee, hear ye, and to, from this moment forward, move into full general election mode. And how did that work out?
And after he did that, we raised another $1.4 million.
But then, to Trump's credit, he then distanced himself from the resolution, writing, for the sake of party unity, they should not go forward with this plan. I should finish the process off at the ballot box. Well, that was good, if Trump wasn't behind the resolution in the first place.
A source tells me that Trump was on board with this resolution initially, that his campaign had signed off on it, but then there was backlash within the party when it became public.
Look, we bagged Trump out enough on this show, John. I'll give him a benefit of the doubt on that one.
No, I don't think there's any doubt. It was one of his top advisors, David Bossy, that put the resolution forward before it got pulled. But the next head-to-head contest between Trump and Haley is in her home state of South Carolina. That's not until February 24th. There has only been one public poll out of that Palmetto state this year, and that one had Trump leading Haley by almost 30 points. Meanwhile, the first official Democratic Party primary is in South Carolina this weekend. President Biden is facing two long-shot challenges: Congressman Dean Phillips and self-help author Marianne Williamson, who are both miles behind in single digits in a state that saved Joe Biden's candidacy in 2020 and which the Democratic Party has made first to award delegates this year. That's despite the primary last week in New Hampshire, which Joe Biden won without campaigning, and he wasn't even on the ballot. He was a write-in candidate, but he still managed a victory there. There's also a Democratic primary in the state of Nevada next week as well. As for Donald Trump's bid for a second non-consecutive term as president, it may have got off to a winning start in the first two Republican primaries, but he's racking up the losses right now in the courtroom.
Former president ordered to pay $83.3 million in damages for the case. It comes months after Mr. Trump was already found liable for sexually abusing and defaming Carol, who Trump mocked while he was president after she made a sexual assault claim against him.
And those damages break down this way: $11 million to repair Carol's reputation, $7 million to help compensate her for emotional harm, and $65 million for punitive damages to punish Trump. Now, you might be wondering how the fines were that big. Well, this was legal analyst John Yu's interpretation.
The whole point of this enormous damages amount, unprecedented damages amount, is to tell Donald Trump to shut up.
And you know what's happened since then? He hasn't posted about her once since the trial.
Well,
maybe it worked.
Maybe he's got 83 million good reasons not to keep talking about Jean Carroll.
At least so far.
Yeah, this week a written decision is also expected in that New York civil fraud case, where Judge Arthur Engoron has already found Trump and his company guilty of fraud, inflating the value of their assets to get cheaper bank loans and insurance deals. Trump's own judgment on that case, though, is rather different to Engoron's.
This is a case that should have never been brought, and I think we should be entitled to damages.
Ain't gonna happen. He's already found guilty. The question now is, what will his penalty be? Jail is off the table because, as like the Jean Carroll suit, this is a civil case, so you don't go to jail for that. But the damages could be even greater, and Trump is likely to be banned as well from ever doing business again in New York. But it turns out the good news for Trump is being liable for fraud and sex offences isn't a major concern for many American voters. In head-to-head general election polls this past week, Trump leads President Biden by 5 points, according to Ipsos Reuters, and 6 points in a Harris X poll.
Not a great start for Biden there, John. He just came off a 39.8% job approval average for 2023. That was the second worst third-year average ever measured by Gallup, just ahead of Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, but he sailed to re-election in he lost.
No. But let's face it, both these guys have their issues, don't they? According to Gallup, only 31% of people would consider voting for an 80-year-old, and 29% would consider voting for someone charged with a felony. Only 23% would consider voting for someone convicted of a felony, which might be coming soon. So none of that is very auspicious. The only politician I can think of that these guys would be sure to beat would be Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell, who recently scored a 6% job approval rating, and that was with a 5% margin of error, so his approval could potentially be as low as 1%. I reckon they could take Mitch.
Yeah, maybe.
Mitch is not amused. This is how we start the longest general election campaign in history, with two incredibly unpopular nominees, except they're not the only choices that voters have. Biden might have a net approval of minus 12 points. Trump might have a net approval of minus 5 points. But independent candidate, environmentalist and anti-vaxxer Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he has a net approval of plus 11 points. And he's particularly popular amongst independents and Republicans. Amongst Republicans, he has a net approval of plus 34 points. So does that mean that he takes voters away from Trump if Republicans like him? Not necessarily. In a recent New Hampshire poll, Biden was leading Trump by 7 points, until you throw Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into the mix, and then that 7-point margin to Biden became a 3-point margin. By the way, Kennedy is already registered to appear on the New Hampshire ballot, so that contest we're describing here will be happening in one of America's swingiest states. But how does it work that he could hurt Biden's vote if Republicans like him more? Well, when asking voters if they would consider voting for an independent, moderate candidate, more Democrats and independents said that they would consider that. Biden's support, it seems, is softer than Trump's support amongst his base. Plus, if you break down RFK Jr.'s support amongst Democrats, you find most of his unpopularity comes from Democrats over 65, whereas younger Democrats are much more RFK curious. And that is a worry for Biden, because guess which group of voters have disproportionately gone cold on him since he was elected? That's right. It's the under 35s. They are falling off the bottom of that graph. So they're most likely to entertain another candidate like RFK Jr. Biden would be getting increasingly worried about that youth vote, John.
Yeah, interesting. We'll see when they actually have a look at Robert Kennedy Jr. and what he really represents. I think that curiosity will turn into indifference pretty quickly, but we'll see. Then, of course, there is the most important primary of all in this election, the Tay-Tay primary. In fact, there's a lot of chatter this week that pop star Taylor Swift is going to endorse Joe Biden for president. Reports say that Trump is claiming privately that he's more popular than Taylor Swift and his fans are more committed. But it does seem, Chaz, that Trump's supporters are worried about this. In fact, they're working up this whole grand conspiracy theory about how Taylor and her football star boyfriend Travis Kelce are involved in this elaborate plot. They're going to rig the Super Bowl and then rig the presidential election.
That's the word on the street, John.
Yeah, crazy street.
Yeah, like Sesame Street for the least reliable people on earth. Fox News' Jesse Waters has explained how this works, that Taylor Swift might be a psyop.
Have you ever wondered why or how she blew up like this? Well, around 4 years ago, the Pentagon's Psychological Operations Unit floated turning Taylor Swift into an asset during a NATO meeting. What kind of asset? A psyop for combating online misinformation.
I'm pretty sure we know how Taylor Swift became big. Her 15-year career has been quite public.
Yeah, it had a part to play, sure.
But pray tell, what are the details of this supposed psyop? Allow super online conservative activist Benny Johnson to explain.
This is what I think is going to happen. There's going to be like some type of proposal after the Super Bowl is rigged for the Chiefs. And then the two of these people become, reach like crazy levels of absolute fame, and then they take all that fame that has been given to them by the rotted corporate press, media, entertainment industry that explicitly backs Democrats, and then they use that in order to try and save Joe Biden.
I don't know how that works. Some have said they'll be proposing at halftime in the Super Bowl.
That's taking a knee, sure.
That's right. And Ramaswamy's got something to say about it. They're all talking about it.
Right.
This is how committed they are to the PSYOP concept. Jack Posobiec, another right-winger, he tweeted that Kanye tried to warn us about the Taylor Swift PSYOP and we didn't listen. Do you realise how crazy you need to be when you start citing Kanye West as a source? The question is, though, why are they so obsessed with Taylor Swift and her new boyfriend, Travis Kelce?
Why are they?
Okay, well, they hate Kelce because, first of all, he did an ad for Pfizer vaccines. They don't like vaccines. Also, he did an ad for Bud Light. Bud Light once also ran an ad with a transgender woman.
Okay.
So that's woke. They don't like that. Right. They hate the NFL because Colin Kaepernick he took a knee during the national anthem about 7 years ago, and they never got over that. Also, at one point in time, the NFL had the black national anthem before the American national anthem. They didn't like that, so they're woke as well. And then the reason they don't like Taylor Swift is she's essentially a Democrat, and also she's a powerful independent woman. Now, if you think I'm reaching there with all this feminist rhetoric, I beg to differ, because the stench of misogyny about their Taylor Swift obsession is overpowering.
She's nasty. She's ugly. Nobody likes her. Nobody likes her. She looks like a teenage boy. Like, dudes don't like her. Like, if you put her in front of, she's ugly.
That's true. Yeah. Does Taylor Swift have any eggs left?
I don't know if she had it to start with.
You mean like bitter, angry women, and that's like Taylor Swift.
Like librarian, like your worst teacher you had, feminism. That's Taylor Swift feminism.
What is virtuous about her for young women to glean? Like, date as many men as possible, complain all the time, ruin men's lives.
She hasn't started a family. She's in her mid-30s.
You have no kids. Like, it's a terrible role model.
Do you see my point?
Yeah.
By the way, these guys are talking about other people being ugly and unattractive.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. You can say a lot of things about Taylor Swift, but lacking talent is probably not one of them.
In fact, none of the things they said is one of them. They're also afraid of her. Why are they afraid of her? Because she's a Democrat and she might be able to single-handedly fix Joe Biden's young voters problem. In 2018, she wrote one Instagram post about registering to vote. That's it. No endorsements, just register to vote. Nearly 65,000 Americans aged 18 to 29 registered to vote in the 24 hours after that post. Also, a poll this week scared right-wingers to death. The poll was conducted by Redfield and Wilton Strategies. They showed 18% of voters would align their choice with Taylor Swift's. However, it also showed 17% are less likely to vote for a candidate endorsed by Taylor Swift. They ignored that bit. They focused on the scary bit. But anyway, this undermines their major culture war narrative as well for the last 5 years, and that is go woke, go broke. You've probably heard that before. Sure. Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce and the NFL have all, according to them, gone woke, apparently. They're the least broke people in America. It also undermines their other major narrative that lefties are unattractive women and girly men, essentially. Swift is living the dream of all conservative women, obviously very attractive. Kelce is living the dream of all conservative men, obviously not a girly man, and they hate it so much, John. It's the culture warriors' perfect storm.
Yes, it is certainly driving them crazy or even crazier. I think it's time actually we get ahead of this conspiracy theory, yes, because she's freaking out so many people. We should go all the way. So I want to tip Taylor Swift for Vice President of the United States. There it is. Has a good look to it.
John, you are so late.
Really?
Way too late.
Biden effectively has Taylor Swift as his VP.
Stranger than fiction. But so far, on young voters, they have been turning against Joe Biden and the way that he is seen, particularly to have supported Israel over the Palestinians ever since the Hamas-led attacks of October the 7th. Nearly 3/4 disapprove of Biden's handling of the war in Gaza, that according to a December poll from the New York Times. Trump now leads Biden by 49 to 43 in that key demographic. Before the war started, those younger voters favoured Joe Biden by 10 points. And Biden's re-election campaign events are now being constantly interrupted by protesters.
Jill and I had a chance to sit down.
And pro-Palestine activists have also been out calling for a ceasefire in places including the US Capitol building's rotunda.
And the reason you're hearing cheering is because people are starting to be arrested.
In fact, Chairs, there are lots of different progressive groups involved in these ceasefire protests around the United States, including on college campuses, as well as lots of major political events. And among those groups is one involving mainly young Jewish Americans calling themselves IfNotNow. Eva Borgwardt is their national campaign spokesperson, and she's with us now. Eva, welcome to Planet America.
Yeah, hi, John. Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us, Eva, what are you hoping that you will achieve through these demonstrations?
This is a movement of American Jews who are calling on our elected leadership to call for a ceasefire, a de-escalation, a hostage exchange, an end to the siege on Gaza, and eventually an end to the underlying conditions that have led to the current nightmare of ongoing occupation and apartheid.
And Eva, there's been a long-standing expectation that the United States will side with Israel, and I'm sure an even greater expectation that Jewish Americans will side with Israel. Is that, though, changing, particularly in your generation?
Even prior to October 7th, we had already seen that 40% of American Jews under 40 think that Israel is currently committing the crime of apartheid. So that was prior to October 7th. And now we're seeing an unprecedented mobilization of that constituency in the streets saying that, Jewish and Palestinian safety are tied together and that we refuse to be pit against each other anymore. And in terms of U.S. support, Israel is the only country to which U.S. aid is completely unconditional. So for most other countries, there are, human rights conditions applied to our military funding. And for Israel, the military aid is all dumped into a bank account in New York once a year as a lump sum. And then there's no tracking mechanism or any way to apply the human rights conditions we apply to every other country. So in terms of the US being a fair and honest broker, there are plenty of conditions on humanitarian support for the Palestinians, but there are currently no conditions on US military funding for Israel. And that's what we're saying needs to change.
Do you think that Joe Biden has the ability to end the war in Gaza without doing things that would ensure Donald Trump is elected in November?
I am terrified of Donald Trump, and that's part of why I'm furious at the disastrous course that the Biden administration has chosen. We know that younger voters in particular are extremely for a ceasefire, but this isn't just younger voters. The majority of Americans want a ceasefire and want, conditions and restrictions on U.S. military aid to Israel. Don't think there should be unconditional U.S. weapons funding. These are extremely popular positions in the American public, and Biden is at his peril ignoring what the majority of Americans want. And so I think that actually Biden's chances in November would be very obviously boosted by doing what the majority of the American public wants and calling for a ceasefire in order to save lives and protect the dignity and safety of both Israelis and Palestinians.
Eva, there seem to be three major kinds of protests these days. One is the more traditional rally in the streets kind of protest. Two is the interrupting political speeches type of protest. And third is the kind of shutting down roads and bridges type protest. Do you have any sense of what kind of protest is most effective and what kind of protest is least effective?
I think that we need to try all of the peaceful and nonviolent means at our disposal. And again, we've tried literally everything: calling, protesting, civil disobedience, and there's overwhelming unity of saying that, we want a ceasefire, we want to not live under a fascist government in the US. And that's why folks are taking to the streets even in February. It's been all winter and we're approaching February and folks are still taking to the streets to call for a ceasefire.
Eva Borgwardt, thank you for joining us on Planet America.
Thank you. Great to talk to you both.
Most elections revolve around the economy, and at one point in time, this election looked no different, mostly because the economy seemed to be so bad. But things have changed. Economic growth is the highest it's been since 2005, if you ignore the pandemic. Incomes are up, gas prices have fallen 40%, weekly jobless claims are low, the stock market's hitting all-time highs, consumer sentiment has risen 29% in 2 months, the largest 2-month increase in more than 30 years. The Washington Post is literally saying America is enjoying the best recovery in the world, and the result? Back in October, an Ipsos poll found people disapproved of Biden's economic management by a 25-point margin. And by January, nothing had changed. So the economy isn't a winner for Biden yet, but it's certainly not a loser for him either. Well, what about other issues? Sometimes elections are about foreign affairs. Trump has been keen to point out that no new wars were started under his watch, whereas the death count due to wars has jumped right up in the last few years under Biden. But when you look at the issues people are talking about in polling, this one doesn't seem to be cutting through. By contrast, John, what does?
Yeah, well, things can change in an election year, that's for sure, one as long as this one. For both sides, the number one issue is probably the other guy, the alternative, whether it's Biden or Trump. But there are key issues that we can also identify. The key issue for Democrats is going to be abortion. It's going to be immigration for Republicans. When the US Supreme Court overturned the landmark Roe versus Wade decision back in the middle of 2022, millions of American women immediately lost their constitutionally protected right to seek an abortion. Since then, 21 states have imposed new restrictions on abortion access. 14 of those states, from Alabama to West Virginia, have banned abortion in all or most cases. In 9 of those states, there are no exceptions for cases even involving rape or incest. In fact, on that, a study just this week estimated that more than 64,000 pregnancies have resulted from rape between July 1, 2022 and January of this year in states where abortion has now been banned. Well, as President, Donald Trump appointed 3 of the judges in the majority that overturned Roe. And Joe Biden sure wants voters to remember that.
The person most responsible for taking away this freedom in America is Donald Trump. I don't think this court and the MAGA Republicans have any clue about the power of women in America.
I think they have some clue. 70% of Americans have said protecting abortion access would be an important issue in determining their November vote, including around 2/3 of independent voters. About half of voters would support a national law legalising abortion right now, including 1/3 of Republicans. This is looking to me like the Democrats' ace card, John.
Yeah, it certainly was during the midterms in 2022. Meanwhile, the surge of immigrants arriving on the southern border of the United States with Mexico is threatening to overwhelm an already stretched to breaking point system. A record 302,000 people arrived at border control points wanting to enter the United States without a visa in the month of December alone. Many of them then claimed asylum. And that has become a political gift for Donald Trump, who has a plan of his own.
Former President Donald Trump now pledging a sweeping immigration crackdown if he wins the White House again. Among his promises, mass deportations, ending birthright citizenship, and denying entry to legal immigrants based on their ideological beliefs.
Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of senators is working on new border control laws this week, linking it to aid for Ukraine and Israel. But Trump is doing everything he possibly can to make sure that will never pass the House.
A lot of the senators are trying to say respectfully they're blaming it on me. I said, that's okay, please blame it on me, please, because they were getting ready to pass a very bad bill.
And I can sum up how big an issue this is for Republicans with one statistic. Biden's approval rating on immigration is only 18%. It's the lowest for any president since Washington Post started asking this question back in 2004. And it might be falling further this week, with some southern state governors agitating for their National Guards to literally start fighting potentially with federal authorities on the border. It is a complete mess down there, and we're going to be going into a lot more detail about that situation on Friday's show.
It's Saturday, June 13th, 2015, a warm, early summer day on New York City's Roosevelt Island. Former First Lady, Senator and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is launching her second campaign for the presidency.
Thank you. Oh, thank you all. Thank you so very, very much.
8 years earlier, she narrowly lost a long, bitter primary battle against Barack Obama, who went on to win the White House. Now, Clinton is seeking to be a successor and America's first female president.
Well, I may not be the youngest candidate in this race, but I will be the youngest woman president in the history of the United States.
And right now, her odds of making history are looking very good indeed. Hillary Clinton leads her nearest rival for the Democratic nomination by 60 points. And she leads her nearest Republican rival, Jeb Bush, by 8 points. And on that sunny day in June 2015, speaking on an island named after Liberal icon Franklin D. Roosevelt, she articulated a dream which now seemed within reach.
An America where a father can tell his daughter, yes, you can be anything you want to be, even President of the United States. Thank you all. God bless you.
3 days later, a 15-minute drive away from Roosevelt Island on Fifth Avenue, businessman Donald Trump descends a golden escalator in Trump Tower to make an announcement that he's teased for decades.
This time, it's for real. Donald Trump is running for president.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States.
17 months later, after another close primary battle, this time against Bernie Sanders, followed by the most bruising and bizarre general election campaign in memory against Trump, Hillary Clinton and her supporters were coming to terms with a shock defeat.
This loss hurts, but please never stop believing that fighting for what's right is worth it.
It was a loss that few could have imagined that previous June, when America seemed likely to make Hillary Clinton its first woman president, but it wasn't to be. And And Chaz, that's all the time we have for another trip back to Planet America, our first for 2024, but not our last. Thanks for being with us.
We're going to be at the same time next week and the Fireside Chat this Friday on ABC News. See you there.
Bye-bye.